for listening in. I'm Satya, co-founder of Scispot. I am a computational person with a data engineering background and excited to show Scispot Glue today. Jason, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jason. I'm strategy advisor for Scispot, and I'm going to introduce us to one of the challenges with data swamps.
Awesome. Mark, would you mind going next?
I'm an advisor to the company, a mentor through the Creative Destruction Labs, which is out of Foster School of Business here. I'm also the chief operating officer at Adaptive, and we've been evaluating the software, so I thought I could speak from that perspective about how we think it could be applied.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Guru. I'm the CEO and founder of Scispot. I'm the least tech person. I'm more of a lab rat by training. So looking forward to this event.
Now, come on, lab rats are cool.
Oh, they are totally cool.
We'll touch upon all the features of Scispot Glue, but before we get right into the product, let's talk about some of the problem statements that we've heard. So we've got Jason, who's the strategy advisor at Scispot, to introduce us with the data swamp dilemma. Jason, over to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So my name is Jason. Just a little bit about myself. During my career, I've worked in biotech R&D and big data consulting. And today I'd like to introduce a challenge and huge missed opportunity in many industries, particularly biotech R&D. So the use of big data in biotech R&D has grown precipitously in recent years and reached an all-time high as companies start leveraging, the huge growth we've all seen in processing and storage. Labs are collecting vast amounts of data from, electronic lab notebooks, laboratory information systems, and a whole host of legacy systems too. And in many cases, this is creating what we call a data swamp. A data swamp is really a messy repository of unstructured, ungoverned data that's really gotten out of hand. And, the more it grows, the messier and more expensive it becomes to maintain. In many cases, much of this data isn't even used. Quoting an industry statistic, 80% of this data just sits there gathering dust. This represents really what is a digital gold mine and missed opportunity for many companies just waiting to be solved. Not to mention the cost of capturing and storing the data with minimal ROI. So I'm now going to hand over to Satya, who's really going to double click into this issue in more detail.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Jason's worked for some of the big pharma and biotech R&D labs. So it's great to hear from him firsthand. And this stat really bothers me that 80% of the generated data never gets fully analyzed as a data engineer and computational person. So before I talk about Scispot Glue in general, I want to touch upon some of the problem statements that we heard from our current customers and potential customers. So some of the customers use Benchling, some use Notion, some use legacy ELN, electronic lab notebook, and LIMS, lab information management systems. Benchling is a great tool, and wet lab folks like it. But I think in some cases where people spend a lot of time is doing data normalization, because in the current the way the biological workflows are evolving, it's getting more and more complex. There is a need where the computational person want to stitch the wet lab data for the downstream analysis. But before they do that, they have to do a lot of data normalization. Some computational person also runs a lot of custom scripts to stitch their assay results with their plate reader data, for instance, or connecting their experiment IDs with some of the results they've got. The other thing that they also kind of spend a lot of time doing is maintaining the complete chain of custody, which is compliant. And throughout the journey of this data, as they go from, let's say, extracting data from Benchling to building their own data lake to building ML pipelines, there is a big piece of plumbing. There's a lot of DevOps work that goes under it. There's a lot of operations stuff that goes under it. So some of that gets unnoticed, and because it's quite laborious, quite tedious. And that's where Scispot Glue kind of comes in to automate some of that work, where if you're extracting this data, not just from Benchling, let's say Notion, or if you use any other system as your electronic lab notebook or LIMS system, you can extract it and then Scispot Glue understand those complex workflow and automates a lot of plumbing work for you that you don't have to do. And then there's a feedback loop that goes back into your ELN and LIMS system as well. So before I touch upon like what Glue is, Mark, do you want to like talk about this problem statement a little bit more, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and maybe talk about it from both the perspective of long experience. I've been doing this for my whole career, kind of the intersection of biology and software engineering, computer science. I think this has always been a challenge, right? We always called this the Roach Motel. Data checks in and it can't check out, right? And we've all experienced this. And I think the broad range, and it's not just the LIMS systems that are outlined there, but it's the broad range of places that even in a relatively small enterprise, the data can live, right? It lives in unstructured data or semi-structured data, it lives in spreadsheets and tabular data, it lives in databases, sometimes multiples. Even for a small company, and sometimes generally for a small company where the effort really was never there to centralize data, not even to get to the data lake or data swamp. I don't know. It's just like, I don't know, like a data empty lot or something. It's a very common problem. And I will say, even for us, where we have actually quite a few structured data systems, being able to make that connection between the range of data that we're collecting and managing, generally in the wet lab setting, right, with things like informatics pipelines that, who knows, those things could be written as shell scripts, or they could be bespoke by contractors, consultants. They might be open source tools that somebody got, but these tools are generally not built into the structure of the LIMS system, but need to call on that data to be able to do their work. So having the glue, right, to tie the information systems that hold the data and hold the system, even if it's all over the place, in some systematic and consistent way with the underlying processing of that data, either locally or remotely, in a way that's scalable and sustainable, I think is a really important thing. The challenge is that many of us, and this is many companies that I've worked with, have sort of underinvested historically in that because it's expensive and a lot of work. And you focus instead on developing the business value in the data. And then suddenly you find yourself with a need to share that data with outside entities, to build regulatory documentation, to do processing or pipeline work, or to build it into a product. And suddenly you're kind of faced with this daunting task to say, oh, geez, now we've got to go write all this code and do all the software engineering, and how the heck are we going to do that? I think this really creates an important, maybe not, it doesn't solve the whole problem, let's be honest, but it's an important component probably to solving that problem without the need to significantly invest in that internalized software engineering. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's kind of my take on where this is particularly and uniquely valuable, and frankly, so of interest to us as well.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, this problem statement resonates with a lot of folks we've spoken to. Now let's double click on some of the ways we can resolve this. But before I do that, if you have not heard of Scispot and want to know at a high level what this platform does, a little bit of background. 2.5 years ago, we started as the most configurable electronic lab notebook and the lab information management system. So we built the wet lab tools for our customers. In that tool set, we have lab sheets, which is the lab information management system that you can design through GUI, graphical user interface, or through command line interface. Then there's electronic lab notebook, which we called lab spaces. And then there are various other tools within the Scispot toolkit for mol bio and chemistry. And then we also work with the computational folks where you can analyze this data. You can also programmatically update some of this data and run analytics on top of it. We have provided our customers a lot of webhooks. So if the events change, as wet lab folks, for example, upload their assay runs or assay results, it automatically triggers the downstream folks to collect that data. And then there's a really good feedback loop that goes back into it. So that's Scispot platform. But what we noticed as we acquired more customers is everybody wanted to stitch this with their existing systems, whether that's legacy systems or whether that's using Benchling or Notion or Airtable. And that's where Glue kind of came in picture, where Glue lets you discover these data sets, whether that's your registry data, your assay runs, your plate data, and then you can run the transformation, cleansing transformation, and then load this data either in Scispot platform or in your own platform. If you've already built something, we could basically have a wrapper around it. and schedule that data as well, because some of the customers who work in collaboration with CROs, academia, one of the use case that we heard quite a lot was, can I listen into like the changes that's happening into my current platform, whether that's Benchling or my own platform? And as I'm listening into those changes, can I then schedule based on how things are being progressed? So if I have experiment results coming in, if I have instrument data coming in, can I listen to those events, get those Parquet files or FASTA files, and then do certain transformation on it? So some of those use cases are also supported by Glue. But I want to take a step back and really double click Glue. If you want to know more about Scispot platform, happy to do a demo with some of you, but let's double click on what actually is Scispot Glue. So, based on the use cases that I just mentioned, what Glue does is it extracts the data from Benchling, from legacy electronic lab notebook. We've seen people using Notion sometimes as their ELN, which is great, but it doesn't have the biological workflow context. So sometimes they have to extract the data before they can do any analysis on it. So there's a directly like the API can extract that data. We'll also do the product demo shortly, so you'll see how that extraction is done. The biggest pain that we've heard though is the transformation layer, because this is where there's a lot of DevOps work that goes into it. There's a lot of plumbing that needs to be done. For example, if I want to figure out the outliers in my results, if I want to compare different runs that I've had, how do I do that? So that's where Scispot Glue's orchestration layer really helps, which really understands what your biotech workflows are. And not only that, you could also use the Scispot Jupyter server if you want to run your own transformation. But our product offers certain templates that I'll show you shortly when we do the product demo, that you can use existing cleansing and transformation templates. For instance, you can say, hey, find all the quantity mismatch that I have, or hey, help me understand how I can stitch this data back to the Benchling data, because the source of this data is coming from the equipment or a plate reader data. So we'll cover some of those examples as well. One other thing which is quite popular that we've heard is enriching this data set. So some customer want to like auto cluster their data to say, actually cluster all of the information that's coming from this CRO, or cluster all the information that is related to this sample ID, this experiment ID, and build a cohort for that clustering. So you can enrich as well once your data is cleansed and transformed. And the reason for doing this is if you don't have structured data, it becomes really hard to like do any visualization on top of it. Some of the ELN and LIMS in the market are great, but they don't have these templates built in to, for example, identify where the duplicates might have occurred, or identify where the transformation needs to happen. And that's where, like, once you've done this transformation and cleansing, you can then this data essentially becomes like a machine readable data in a structured format. So you can set up customizable alerts and listen into some changes and easily have a feedback loop back to your wet lab folks. So think of this Glue as not just like stitching together your legacy systems with your computational systems or with Scispot, but think of this as connecting your wet lab workflows and computational workflows as well, because there's an important feedback loop that goes from the computational folks back to bench scientists to say, hey, these are the results of my analysis. Make sure you attribute this back to the experiment ID. So that part is really powerful, and that's what we've heard from our current customers as well. So what are the outcomes that you get from Scispot Glue? So the main outcome is like improved data experience, because the folks we work with are really smart scientists, researchers, computational folks. But one of the pain points they've raised is just maintaining the pipeline, doing a lot of DevOps work is actually causes a lot of issues where the operational aspect is not something that they look for. They'd rather build the apps on top of the infrastructure. The other challenge they've mentioned is the data normalization takes a lot of time before any insights or decisions that can be derived from the data. So that's where like improved data experience is one of the main value prop behind Glue. The other use case that I've heard from one of the customer is basically like setting up an alerting system so they can listen into changes happening in the source, whether that's Benchling, Notion, or any other product, and also listen in how different results are coming through and can be compared dynamically within their notebook. So we'll look into some of those examples when I play the video shortly.
One question that we're often asked is if it is specific to any workflow, research workflow data. So we do see a few workflows are more popular, like bioprocessing, high throughput screening, screening of different types, NGS workflows, or proteomics, multiomics. But it is not specific to any one workflow. Our goal is to make it useful across different workflows, but we are setting up templates for cleansing and transformation as we are growing our customer base for Glue.
Hi, here's a quick demo of Scispot Glue. Imagine that I work for a cultivated meat company and I'm a computational biologist. And my wet lab scientists have shared a lot of data with me that is currently uploaded in Benchling. Some of the data is vector library, primer inventory, latest equipment data, sample runs, the assay results. And what I want to do is I want to dive right in and really cleanse that data and then analyze that data. And as I'm analyzing and visualizing some of the data after cleansing and transformation, I then want to ingest that to some of my downstream pipelines. So let's look at this demo, how I would go about using Scispot Glue to not just normalize, cleanse, and transform, but to visualize the data as well. So I'm going to go to Glue and click on Add Connectors. And there, Glue lets you bring data from Benchling, CSV, and various other tools. But in this demo purposes, I'll show Benchling and CSV. So let's say I have certain data coming from Benchling. So I'm going to put the Benchling URL. For the demo purpose, I'm just going to do Benchling and then do the API key. Okay. And then it would ask me, what is the sync interval? Do I want to sync this data coming from Benchling every 15 minutes, every hour, every day? I'm just going to do every 30 minutes for now. Awesome. And now it would ask me what pipelines I want to connect. So these are different endpoints offered by Benchling that I can ingest directly in Scispot Data Lake. So I'm going to select all of them for now. Okay, awesome. So I've built those pipelines and those are ingesting. So in a few seconds, you'll see they'll be ready to view. Okay, awesome. So you'll see the sync status is ready. And all of this data that my wet lab folks have currently been working in Benchling is now ingested as different pipes within Scispot. And it's also scheduled for a sync every 30 minutes as I put that as a sync interval. What I can do now is I can add transformation on this sync data. But before I do any transformation, let me show you another cool thing. I'm getting some plate result data from my instruments, plate reader data that I want to ingest as a CSV. So I can also ingest a CSV. I can choose my CSV file, and once I've got my CSV file, it would automatically detect the headers. It would create a lab sheet. Lab sheet is nothing but what Scispot refers to the LIMS databases. It would automatically know what columns you have in the results table. So Scispot has a machine learning algorithm that understands the type of column as well. So yeah, what you can do is you can ingest that and then you can stitch this data with Benchling as well. Okay, but for now, let's talk about some of the transformation for any of the entries and the registry data that I've already got from Benchling. So you'll see like I have vector library and I can add transformation to this. The various transformation offered out of the box, but you can write your own custom rules on top of this as well. The most common ones we've heard is like standardizing the unit. We've also heard about removing outliers. We've also heard of like checking the primer length, not suitable for assays. There's quite a few things you can do. You can also dedupe some of this data. You can also select custom transformation. But for now, I've already built some of those transformations. So let's see how they look. So once the data is synced, I've cleansed the data, I've done the transformation. It basically creates lab sheets in Scispot. And you'll see like lab sheet, there's a raw data that comes directly from Benchling into a machine readable data and a human readable data format as well. And it also does the transformation that you've selected. So in this case, in the vector library, I've done a few transformation. What have I done? I basically built connections. So this connection is built in where I can see all the metadata associated with this vector library row. And the other thing that I've also done is I've set up a flag where I want to do resistance gene that contains streptomycin, for instance. So you can set up these flags, and then you can slice and dice the data by any of these flags as well. So it would basically help me understand, okay, show me all the rows where this flag is set up. Let's look at another example of this transformation. So I've also got the assay results raw data from Benchling, and I've done some cleansing and transformation on this data as well. So I can basically figure out what is the validation status for some of these assay runs. I can also dedupe some of this information if they are duplicated in Benchling. And then one other example that I want to show is the equipment data. So I've got the raw data from Benchling, and I've also done some transformation to the equipment data. In this case, I can set up flags for outliers. So if I have certain outliers which goes above certain values, I can easily set them up and see those rows easily from this machine readable and also a nicely structured data format as well. Okay, great. Now let's go back to the dashboard where I was showing you all the injection, and let's see how I can visualize this data. So there's quite a few transformations you can do. You can schedule your data, you can sync your data, not just from Benchling, but from Airtable, Notion, and a lot of other tools that we offer. But let's say now I want to visualize this data. So Scispot visualization tool already has like built-in templates. It also understands the context of biological workflows because we've seen this data a lot. So it's not like a standard data lake plus ETL tool where it doesn't understand the biological context. But in this case, it does. So it has already prepared certain visualizations where I can see the assay results by project ID, assay runs by project ID. There's also like equipment data. So it's showing you like distinct values and comparing different runs, if you will. Then one other example that I want to show is the primer inventory. So let's look at this data. It's like a scatter plot. The x-axis is the forward primer length, and then the y-axis is the count. And I've also built some analytics, which basically shows the count by primer ID into a nice waterfall chart. You can use these out-of-the-box template as is, or you can also write your own SQL query using Scispot lab sheets, the data lake, to do some joins if you want to like join different tables as well. Awesome. One last thing I really want to show that I really like is the sample runs data set as well. So let's look at this guy. Okay, so it also shows me like distinct values of quantity grouped by quantity and sample and filtered by the sample ID and basically showing me for different sample runs. So it's really easy to see all of this data in one format, if you will. And then I've also got some vector library data. Again, this one includes like distinct values of resistance genes grouped by the UUID on the y-axis. But any of these charts can be configured, or you can use the out-of-the-box templates. And if you browse data, this is my Sandbox account, you will see all the databases that I've ingested, and then I can basically see the structured format of that database and build visualization on top of it. So for example, if I open sample manager data, it would show you like the structured format in a table, and I can build any charts that I was showing you earlier. Or you can use like out-of-the-box templates that I was showing you as part of this analytics. So yeah, thank you for watching. In this demo, I showed you really quickly extracting some of the transformation templates and the visualization, but there's no limit in terms of like the configurability aspect of this. So this is the real Satya back, the live Satya. That was the recorded Satya. I can see there are some questions. Guru, do you want to, if you've not already answered, do you want to take them if that's okay?
Yeah, one of the question is around how do you manage CRO data? So for us, CRO data is just one of the sources. Like Satya demonstrated, how can you use Benchling as a source, ingest it, transform it, and make it ready for visualization or your downstream analytics. You can do exactly that for CROs. There are a couple of ways. You can use Scispot data rooms where CROs can drop their files, and you can create database, transform that data, cleanse that data, and use it for your downstream work. Or if CROs share CSV, they don't want to come to Scispot environment just yet. You can drop different CSV files, merge different CSV files, as long as you have unique compound ID, unique sample IDs. You can merge the data, cleanse it, and use it for your computational workflows or for your visualization. purposes. Other question is around from Sarah is around images and managing metadata related to images. You can totally do that. So we support all file format. TIFF is pretty popular for image data, but also all the annotation related to images, all the metadata can be captured in Scispot lab sheets. You can again do the cleansing and use it for further analysis.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, folks, for joining in. If there are no more questions, I'll still give you 30 seconds if there's anything else you want to ask. And then what we'll do is this event will be simulcasted on LinkedIn shortly as well. So folks who didn't get the Vimeo invite, they can watch it on LinkedIn live as well.